Well, today we get to do Moses and the golden calf. And I was thinking this morning, I forgot, in high school, they do those high school superlatives in the yearbook, most likely this, most likely that. I got a guy with the golden calves. That was what I was voted for in high school. I was a hurdler, golden calves. You're not buying it, no. Because I'll tell you why. It's fake news. Fake news, it's a big thing right now, and a lot of people are talking about it on the news, kind of ironically, about the fake news. But even that, fake news, is not a new thing. In our family, we had something very similar to fake news. Over the last nearly 21 years, we called it Facts by Sam. My daughter Samantha is prone to telling stories. It's hard to tell where the truth begins and ends in these stories with her. She went to Asia last May, and when she came home, she was telling us about a trip to the fake market in Hong Kong where you can buy knockoff goods. And she asked one of the guys who was selling his wares, I really want a real Kate Spade yellow purse, not one of these knockoffs. Where's the real stuff? And so the story goes, she said, they took me down a dark alley to a door that was unmarked. We went up these stairs and down a long hall and through another door where they slammed it behind me, and there were guys with guns and the room was filled with purses. And she bought a Kate Spade purse, and I think it was a knockoff, but we didn't know where the truth ended and the story began. She likes to tell us about, remember, Mom and Dad, that time where I was almost decapitated riding my bike as a kid? That one we know because we were there, and we can say, I remember you riding your bike and you rode under a chain and it caught you on the neck, and we did have to take you in to see the doctor, but you were not almost decapitated. Maybe we can dial that story back a bit. Or she tells about the time, remember, Mom and Dad, that time I was at Grandma's and Matthew hit me in the head with a doorknob, and Grandma had to take me to the ER, and I was in the hospital for days, and we don't recall that one at all. But it's not just fake news or Facts by Sam. It goes way, way back. And for the purposes of today, as we look at Exodus, I'm going to call it disremembering. That's what we're going to look at today. As human beings, we have a tendency to forget things or to distort things in our own memory. And we run into that today. So to make sure that we aren't disremembering anything as a group here, I want to go back and just recap what we've been learning so far about Moses so that we can be on the same page. Moses was born at a time when the leader of Egypt was worried that the Hebrew slaves were getting a little too big to control. And so in response, he decided he was going to have all of the newborn sons killed. Well, Moses' mom and his sister took a gamble that led to Moses not being killed. And actually, he ended up being raised by Pharaoh's daughter. And Moses lived for 40 years, a great life, until he got called out for killing an Egyptian who was beating one of Moses' family members, one of his Hebrew kin. Moses fled for 40 years. He worked as a shepherd for Jethro. Jethro ends up becoming Moses' father-in-law. Moses talks to a burning bush. It turns out that the burning bush is God telling Moses, go back to Egypt and free my people. You remember those Hebrews who are in Egypt, they're slaves. So Moses goes back to Pharaoh. He tries to negotiate to let the people go, and Pharaoh wasn't having it. Insert plagues of increasing intensity. Pharaoh lets the people go, and then he changes his mind. He chases them out to the Red Sea. God parts the Red Sea. The Israelites go through it. Egypt's army is drowned. Then God leads the people through the desert with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. God leads them through the wilderness to the base of a mountain. We land at Mount Sinai, where Moses goes up to meet God, who gives him the 10 Commandments. And this is where our story takes place today. Here we are, God, Mount Sinai, Moses, and the people. And we really need to establish more than what was just read in our reading from Exodus to understand what's going on today. God is on top of the mountain. There's a wild cloud full of lightning and thunder and blasting trumpets. And God speaks to Moses in the presence of the people, and listen to what God says, because this is really important. This is from chapter 18. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my commandment, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. God reminds the people of the bigger picture, the story of God's redemptive plan. He's saying, remember Abraham, blessed to be a blessing. He was blessed to be a blessing. You, Hebrews, Israelites, you are blessed to be a blessing. We, as part of that, are blessed to be a blessing. Well, let's jump ahead to chapter 20. God's about to speak the 10 Commandments to the people, and notice how he begins them. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. We need to remember this, because this is key to the whole thing. And this is the thing that gets disremembered throughout the story. How does God identify himself? I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of slavery. Who brought the people out of slavery? God. Yahweh brought the people out of slavery. Whose God is Yahweh? He's the people's God. Well, let's keep this going. So Moses and God continue to have a conversation, and at the end, Moses writes it down in a book. It's called the Book of the Covenant. It includes the 10 Commandments and all the civil laws. And in Exodus 24, we hear this. Then Moses took the Book of the Covenant, and he read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. Now, side note, I love that this is Exodus chapter 24, verse 7. Because the idea that all that the Lord has spoken, we will do and we will be obedient, this is a 24/7 commitment by the people of Israel to God. Let's keep going in chapter 24. Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. On the 7th day, he called to Moses out of the cloud. Now, the appearance of the glory of God was like a devouring fire on top of the mountain, in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud, and he went up on the mountain. Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, this 40-day and 40-night conversation that takes place between God and Moses is recorded in chapters 25 through 31. And God tells Moses a lot. And I'm sure there's things that they talked about that we don't even have written down. He tells Moses, how to build a tabernacle. God takes it all. He writes it onto stone tablets. And while that conversation is happening on top of the scary, fiery, cloud-covered mountain that actually, it's hard to see here in the dark, but I feel like it's something out of the Lord of the Rings. Well, something is brewing at the base of the mountain. It's disremembering. It's at the heart of the story today. In Exodus 32, verses 1 through 14, we see a serious case of disremembering or distorting the image of God. Look at what the people say. When the people saw that Moses was delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." And did you catch that? Who did they say brought them out of Egypt? Moses. Here we see the first way that we humans tend to disremember God. We focus on the human leader. It happens all the time. People go to a church because of the dynamic preaching, or that the pastor remembers your name. Or maybe here you come because you never know if Pastor C is going to bust out a guitar in the middle of the sermon and sing you a song. Or Pastor Robinson is going to dive deep into history, and all of a sudden you're going to learn something you didn't know that makes it all click into place. I have a chance in my job at Concordia to run in some of the megachurch circles here, and I see it there all the time. I'll tell you, one of the main reasons that those churches grow so large so fast is because of the particular personality of their senior leader. And it's not wrong to be attracted to a leader. God calls people to be leaders. God called Moses to be a leader. He needs leaders. But the danger is when we start giving credit to the leader. For good or for bad, we should not think that the pastor somehow in any way stands between us and God. For that matter, while I've got your attention on this, we should adjust our thinking to about how the church cares for each of us. We are the church. We care for each other. It's not the pastor's job, it's our job. But back to the focus on the leader. We're at the beginning edge of a wonderful journey here at St. Paul's. We've come through a capital campaign. We're prepping for a big remodel. And we're looking at what God wants to do in the future and how we can resource that vision. And the danger that we face in the process is to shift the focus and say, oh, would you look at what we've done? Look at what the pastor's vision has done. And look at where our vision team is going to be taking us. Who leads the next great thing? Who delivers us from slavery? Is it Moses or is it God? Well, let's continue on. The people are afraid of what's happening to Moses. He's been gone. He's dead, right? Who could go up to the top of Mount Doom and survive? They need a new Moses. They need to look to something to lead them. And so Aaron takes their gold earrings and forms them into the shape of a calf or a bull. Look at what it says in verse 4. These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now wait, who brought them out of Egypt? A golden calf? Does this seem strange to you? What's going on here? I don't think that the people were dumb enough to think that God didn't exist anymore and that a golden calf led them out of Egypt. Because look at what Aaron says in verse 5. Tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord, to Yahweh. The people didn't replace God. What they did was reduce God to a form that they could understand. You see, it was a common belief in that day that the gods would ride on the back of a bull. And if Yahweh was going to lead them, well, he would need a bull, right? This is the second common way that we disremember God. We reduce God to a God box, one that makes sense to us. And we forget about what God said about himself. What is your God box? They come in many shapes and sizes, and sometimes we reduce God to a theology or a set of doctrines. And we say, this is how God operates. And if I see anything outside of this box, then I will not accept it. This does not correspond with my theological perspective, therefore I must dispose of it. Or sometimes we reduce God to a thing that we call religion. And we think that if we go through certain motions and rituals, then God will look favorably upon us, and he'll be there to pitch in. Or if we show up at the right time and we sing the right way, God will hear us, and he'll give us what we ask. Kind of an I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of a deal. But I think honestly, here in Orange County, there's a different kind of God box. A different kind of shiny golden calf that we like to worship. The heart of the question, the heart of this God question is, who delivered us from slavery? And let's be honest, I think most of the people that we run with would probably say, I did. I did. I worked my tail off all my life. I saved my money, and it is my security. That is my deliverer. Or maybe it's success that saved us. Or at least we strive for success in the hope that it will save us. And then there are those of us who might think that there is no real salvation. So what delivers me is my escape. It's my drug of choice. Whether it's sex or substance or sports, as long as it eases the pain, I'm saved. It's not that I don't acknowledge that there's a God, way up there on the mountain. But this shiny gold box makes so much more sense to me right here and right now. And that is what is happening on the ground at the base of the mountain. Well, now, let's go up into the clouds on the mountain and see what's happening there. Look at what God says to Moses in verse 7. your people, who you brought out of the land of Egypt. They've acted perversely. Now, again, for me, this is a parent moment because it reminds me of how many times my wife has said to me, do you know what your daughter just did? Do you know what your son said to me? I hope you're a little perplexed by this because right now God is raging at his people. Remember their 24/7 commitment that they agreed to the 10 Commandments and said they wouldn't craft an image or have any other gods, and now they're cheating on him. And God says, get out of the way, Moses, I am going to waste them. And then, Moses, I'm going to start over with you. You will be the new Noah. You will be the new Adam. You will be the new Abraham. I'm going to keep my promise with you. But what's going on here? What did God say here? He said, your people, whom you brought out of Egypt. I think God's testing Moses. This is the flip side of that first disremembering where the people gave Moses all the credit. And how would you feel if you were Moses at this moment and God said that? Hey, maybe I am good at this leadership thing. Maybe I am amazing and sweet. God wants to start over with me. I'm going to get to have my own denomination named after me. But that's not what Moses does. Here we come to the climax of the story. Moses says to God, "Oh Lord, why does your wrath burn so hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand?" And there it is. Moses remembers. And I can just imagine God smiling and nodding. That's right, Moses. Now you're ready. I won't wipe them out. I'll keep my promise. Of course I will. As we move forward together, let's make sure we don't disremember the story. God has delivered us from sin and bondage. Not a man, not an idea, but God. And God is dynamic. God is living. And just when you think you've got him figured out, he's going to amaze you because he can't be reduced to fit into our boxes. The living God is with us. He goes before us like a cloud, and he leads us deeper into the promise of redemption and invites us to join in that story. Let's enjoy that journey together. Will you pray with me, please?